We had been watching a house develop kind of parallel to us across the road, and we'd been admiring the architecture, and then I saw that it was GKMP who were doing that. So when we were in the process of just meeting a few different people about the kind of feasibility of renovating this house, we contacted them, and they were the first architects that we met who we felt really got a grasp of what we were trying to do. They came and they met us on site. They immediately noticed things that we liked about the site. So for example, the light. They very quickly were able to capture what we were saying and kind of bring it back to us in a way that made sense and that it would work for us. We both felt, which would be unusual, but we both felt that they got it. And I think that moment we had confidence in them, and we never really kind of wavered with that. We'd done some work next door without architectural input, and although we were very happy with it, we knew that it didn't have the kind of wow factor that perhaps we were looking for. And also we had found it quite stressful in that after the event we would have said, oh God, if only, or I wish, or that could have been designed better, or why didn't we do the bathroom at the same time. Whereas with this, it was just a case of kind of handing it over and saying, listen, this is what we want, this is where we want to get to. And every step of the way then, it was kind of managed by the architects. So we'd have meetings, I think once every 2 weeks, and they would have had done the minutes. They would record what people were saying. They would, given out the tasks to the individuals, and they would have worked with the builder and any of the other contractors who were on site. Often within the process, we would have a discussion, or we would consider something like all together, and it wasn't about them saying, well, this is the way it should be. And so we were able to bring ideas to it, but then they were able to take those ideas to a place where, it was a good design. Very, very quickly, I could see that they were considering the whole house. There's a bedroom upstairs, for example, which is quite small. And when I first realised how small it was going to be, I was a little bit panicked. But actually then the architects came in and they designed the space in terms of the bed and the furniture in the room and how it would work functionally. And now it's a super room and it works really, really well. And it doesn't matter that it's small because it works. Where once maybe I would have admired a big house, now I would think, oh, nightmare. Too much space. One of the things I learned was if you push something a little bit more than maybe you're comfortable with, the end result is probably better.
We're in One Windmill Lane, which is the first of 4 buildings that Hibernia is developing in the Windmill Quarter. It's a very famous site. This is the site of the former Windmill Lane Studios, which is infamous from the U2 perspective. First 5 albums were recorded here. The building here, the building that Mola won the award for, is a 120,000 square foot office building. It's got a pretty unique feature in that it's got a almost 8,000 square foot reception, which is pretty unheard of in Dublin. Through collaboration between ourselves and Mola, we decided that the building needed this type of reception, and between us we came up with the concept of turning it into a multi-use space. So it has the ability to be converted into a town hall or meeting space for up to 350 people. I would have worked a lot with Mola going back to my previous life working as a consultant. This was Hibernia's first project. It was a tricky project, but it was a very important project. So like all relationships, you go towards the people that you trust. And you know that have delivered for you in the past. It was them who actually came up with the concept of the very large reception, which commercially is a complete bad idea. But actually when we looked at it and we kind of brainstormed what we could do with it, what we actually managed to do was create a space that the towns were prepared to pay for. So, in reality, the architectural idea was what led to what this building, why this building became so different. They were involved in the master planning of the whole project as well. From an early stage, I think they got what we were trying to do, trying to create a community. And, I would regard what we've done here as a bit like the kitchen of a house, for our whole development. That's really what we tried to do. And a lot of the success of that is down to the way it looks, the way it feels, the texture of the interiors. What we've realized through a little bit of risk taking is that the whole structure and design of office buildings is dramatically changing, and people and businesses are looking for a lot more breakout spaces, informal spaces. I think what you're going to see is developers in the future building a lot of their buildings with a lot more flexible space within them. And I think if the flexible space is good enough, I think it'll be rentalized. So in a way, we proved a concept here, which hadn't been proved before really in Dublin, and the space has been massively used. Unfortunately in Dublin, talking to the architects, we can't get a lot of scale, so we have to do our clustering concept in numerous buildings, because you can't get a 300,000 or 400,000 square foot building that you can do these facilities in a single building and get that critical mass. The big criteria for designing good office buildings now is the tenants moving in, is that space attractive to their employees? And that's really why you see the Googles and the Facebooks, LinkedIns, Twitters creating the campus style facilities that they have. And if smaller companies are going to compete with them for employees and talent, they're going to have to provide similar type spaces. Now, I suppose what we're trying to do is provide that communally here. Cities are the new countries. It's where investment is going to be won and lost over the next kind of 50 or 60 years. There's going to be 70% of the world's population living in cities in 20 to 30 years' time. And our cities are not being managed and developed particularly well, and I think we need a lot more voices. All in all, I think it was a very successful project. We created a fantastic building with a concept that had never been delivered before, and we made significant profit for our shareholders.
Over a dozen years ago, the gallery, having had lots of piecemeal changes and improvements over many, many years, decided to get a master plan to look over the entire estate. There had been a long trajectory, if you like, of increasing dilapidation in the gallery. And paintings were mouldy, roofs were leaking. The OPW undertook a EU procurement to find architects. The final phase is about quite substantive new build. The phases we've done have been about conservation much more, apart from the space we're in, where we're filming, which was the infill to make a new courtyard. So the EU procurement process was adopted rather than perhaps an international competition. And I think the criteria of value and quality were those that were set. We're the primary users of the spaces we're in. And how can we bring those experiences and our particular needs to the table in talking to the architects? So rather than saying, this is what we need, off you go and design it, it became much more of a discussion, a dialogue. They came up with, in a sense, a very clear concept, the idea of the solid, the void, the solid, the void. The solids being the existing wings, that they weren't going to change. The voids we're standing on now, where you could look at the communication between the different levels. You could look at the passage of the visitor through the building, which had been one of the great bugbears of visitors throughout the ages at the National Gallery. They tended to get lost. You will see more of their own architectural style in the final phase. At the moment, what was hugely admirable was the way they went about this as a conservation architectural project. So a lot of the look and the feel of the two historic wings hasn't changed, but the sophistication and ingenuity of hiding all of the technical equipment behind walls in the voids by running it underground and up through the building, that was a hugely complex undertaking for many, many people, but led, of course, by the architect. Well, in effect, the plant room was literally the guts of the project. I mean, the fact that everyone walks over the forecourt now doesn't realise that they're walking over about a third the volume of the Dargan wing. The architects are very ingenious in finding a place to put all of that M&E. And, I used to joke that we buried the money. That essentially is what happened to a lot of the funds. It went into the energy centre, and how those results of what's happening in the energy centre are distributed out throughout the building. So I think the space we're in is a very remarkable addition to the gallery. Everyone just assumes it's always been here now, but it is fantastic. If you think of the materials that were here, the rough stone of the wall behind me, the brickwork around the windows, these wonderful white tiles, They were there already, but when the architects came, they added very subtly things that hadn't been there before, like the terrazzo floor or the concrete on the lift shafts and the wonderful glass roof. And so just by melding in a very, very subtle way materials, respecting those that have come before and adding new materials, they've created a real dialogue between the old and the new. The sense of daylight, of real light, animated daylight, is one of the great triumphs of the building. It really helps, of course, people to orientate themselves, which is helpful. The actual routes through the building will become clearer when the whole lot's finished. But I think the quality, the feel, the experience of being in the buildings is absolutely extraordinary. There's a real uplift, and the enthusiasm really from everyone who's been into the space has been great for all of us to behold. I came to the gallery and the architects had already been appointed. And one thing that I noticed straight away, that I could trust them. And I think it's really important to know in that relationship that if you trust the people you're working with, and of course, preeminently includes the architects in this case, if something is going, slightly off, adrift, awry, whatever it might be, you've got to be able to say so. You've got to be able to say, look, actually, that's not going to work, or from our point of view, can you think of it this way? And certainly Healing and Peng were always extraordinarily responsive to that conversation, that ongoing conversation we had. And as an incoming director, I found it extremely helpful.
We started building in 2016 and we finished in 2017. It went to tender and Simon J. Kelly were the successful architects, and they would have presented the designs to the Board of Management at the time. The Board of Management, I suppose, in agreement with the department, were happy with them. I know that the site wasn't quite big enough, so they couldn't take a generic design, so they had to bespoke it. We used to have regular site meetings every couple of weeks. And what I found was Dermot really controlled those very well. He led them very well, I suppose, but he also held people accountable, held them responsible, and kept the project moving, but in a very nice way. He had great attention to detail. You'll go around the school and you'll see the fair-faced blockwork. You won't find anything out of place. It was very, very careful, very clean, and he insisted on that. And I think he set that bar high early, and it was up to the builders to follow it. But mostly, I have to say, they realised that, and I realised that, he wasn't just being that way because he thought he had to be that way. He's that way for a reason, but there were things he could give on, he would give on. There was compromises without compromising on quality. And in fairness to him here, he wanted to build something that we would be proud of, and that he would be proud of. And that came across all the time. Originally, I was thinking that one part of the school would be better for the infants than the other. And it was only when Dermot explained to me why he had put the infants around a courtyard that I understood the thinking that had gone in behind this building. So you will see that the parents come in through the front door, and there's double doors. So that basically the front door is locked when the children are at school, but the infants themselves can't escape, for want of a better word. And you might laugh with that, but we do have a couple of flight risks, and it is a serious thing for us to make sure they're safe. They come into the courtyard here and they can collect them directly from the outside door of the classroom. Whereas in our old school, we would have had a queue of parents down the corridor. So to be fair to him, when I understood his thinking behind it, I thought, yeah, this is well thought out. We think architects just design the walls and just design the windows and the type of roof, but I never realised the amount of thought. So for example, in the courtyard there's Jack Monterey silver birch tree, beautiful tree. He has put it in there because I can't remember the word he used, but it's like it reflects, or it's a nod to Holy Trinity Spire here. It connects it. And the windows here are like welcoming the community into the school. He didn't put a wall around the school because he didn't want for people to think this is a private property. It's great to know the children are visible and they're seen and they're not behind walls, and everything is transparent and open. We did a book on this, and we got each child to write down their thoughts of when they were leaving the old school and coming here. And it was so wonderful to get their thoughts, but one of the first things nearly every child said was the colours and the 50,000 marbles that act as a drainage system. I mean, they love it. Now, they love it so much that we have to stop them from trying to pull them out of the ground, and little fingers will after a while. And Dermot actually designed the amphitheatre out there. And the idea with that is that children would have a space that they could have their own class. You know, the infants love it, and we give them chalk and they write on the blackboard. The other big thing, look, is light. The classrooms are so bright. It's dark enough in Ireland, and especially in the west of Ireland. Having big windows has been fantastic. They just love the space, and they're, you know what, they're warm. In our old school, we really had to have the heating pumped to keep them warm, and that was difficult. If you trust your architect, they have that vision. They can see things that, look, as a principal, I'm very busy. I haven't time really to be thinking about what colours I'd like to think I do. I'd like to have an input, but at the same time, colours and, you know, all of that kind of thing, they generally have a good idea what they're talking about. Most of the time, anyway.
The building block is a co-working space. It opened in January 2017. The architect, John Monaghan, approached me during the summer of 2016. He was interested in exploring the idea of a co-working space in the centre of town. I had experience working with startups and local businesses, and I could see the potential. It was really in a response to a lot of people looking to move back to the west of Ireland and looking for a place to work from. There's a growth in remote working, and there's a lot of people coming back to start up their own businesses.
This project came on the desk as a standard doer-upper of the outside of the building. When we partnered up, we proposed this brief to the landowner that we could architecturally have a role, but then obviously economically and socially then it can have a role in ground floor while still fulfilling the needs of having a tenant.
Today on the ground floor we have 37 desks and 10 hot desks, and it's been a pretty busy year and a half so far. From the get-go it attracted a lot of excitement and interest purely because of the design outside. There has been very little development here for a very long time, and it was just as things were starting to turn, and all of a sudden this building, which had been salmon pink for a very long time, was transformed with the kind of what's now become the iconic blue colours of the building block outside. We kind of let that sit there for 2 or 3 months before we said what was actually happening.
We formed our own brief, which was interesting. There was obviously a set budget, but we had a landowner that was willing to work with the brief that we'd proposed. So suddenly, in this project, you become the architect. We're resident here as No G Architects ourselves, and you're co-founder of a space where there's a daily and weekly involvement. So your architectural role gets merged into having this other sort of representative role of something positive within a town.
Over the Christmas before we opened, we held a couple of open days. Between that lovely time between Christmas Day and New Year's, when everyone's at home, they're visiting their families, they might be living in Dublin but they kind of would love to live in Sligo, to let people come in and check it out and ask us questions. We had a couple of hundred people over those days. One of the most exciting things about working with an architect is that there's no time for stale ideas or lack of innovation, and that any meeting or any conversation or even any WhatsApp message tends to lead on to a great idea or a pivot. Design and architecture can actually excite and engage a town, and it's really set a blueprint of how to do things like this and how a centre of town can be re-energised.
The project came about as part of our downsizing initiative. This was formerly a side garden, and there's now 4 units, 4 homes here, and they were specifically designed for elderly people. This project was a collaboration between the Housing Department and the Architects Department, and we worked very closely together within the project team. We set up an in-house team, so we would have members from the Architects Department, we would have staff from maintenance team. So the maintenance team is very important because they're the ones at the end of the day who are going to have to maintain the building in terms of the heating and the lighting and any of the plumbing or any of those things that go wrong. So it's really important that they understand how the mechanics of it work. We'd also have somebody from the allocations team. That's really important, because what we want to make sure is that the building is designed for those people it's going to be allocated. In this case, 2 of them are fully accessible and the 2 upstairs are ambulant disabled. So what we're trying to achieve here is lifelong living. Before, this was a corner site and there were some elements of antisocial behaviour from the fields area here, and now with our 4 homes here, there's passive overlooking and the antisocial behaviour aspect has been eliminated. This was a side garden. So we're looking at some of the infill developments where we can see where there's a large side garden, and what we're trying to do is this is sustainable from 2 points of view. It's sustainable in terms of the energy efficiency of it, but it's also sustainable in terms of the community. So what we're doing is we're downsizing. We have people downsizing from larger units and freeing up those larger units for younger families on the waiting list, and then they can downsize into the community. So it's sustainable in terms of the community as well. So these people get to stay in the community where they know and where they like and where they know their neighbours and their friends and their families. So it's really important from that sustainable aspect as well. The learnings I would take away from this project is really that we need a collaborative approach between the architects department and the housing department. We need to make sure that the client's needs are met. The housing department is often referred to as the client department, whereas I would see the client as the end user. So what we would try to do is bridge that gap between the architects and the end user. So communication is really the key to make sure that we get all those things right, so that the tenant can be comfortable in their home, they can freely move around. When you look behind me here and you see it's fabulous, it's really energy efficient, it's A1 rated. There are 4 very happy tenants in here.
Well, the Opening Up Port Centre Precinct project was our first large physical intervention in the port to enhance our mission towards port city integration. We've been marooned behind stone walls for 30 years, and we sought to break down some of those barriers along the East Wall Road, which is a hostile, austere face to the city. 2014, our Chief Executive, Eamon O'Reilly, asked me to write a brief to open up Port Centre. So we had a competition, invited architects to enter. As a result, Dermody Architecture won the first stage of that competition. Dermody Architecture read our brief, interpreted it really well. They completely got the idea that we wanted to take down some of the barriers between Port Centre and the city. Their concept of the turnstiles was really compelling and attractive to us. The inclusion of the stainless steel sphere, its resonance back to the original time ball, and its all historic connections to the port were really important. The concept of the maritime garden and exploiting the little green space, the only oasis of green in an otherwise grey and industrial landscape, was a great addition to the scheme they presented. They got under the skin of the port, they got into where the client was coming from. They thoroughly studied the brief. They asked the appropriate questions. It was a reaffirmation of the need to have a really good design brief, but to have enough flexibility to allow an architect bring wider creative elements to the scheme. Very important for the client to have an open mind as well. The power of the visual, I think, with modern technology and 3D modelling, it's a really important tool that should be in every client's toolbox and their architect's toolbox. I think use 3D visuals to explain and articulate designs to your own people. Bring them along with you so there's no surprises at the end of the day. I didn't think it'd look like that. Oh my God, I'm shocked by what that is. And realistic modelling of how the development will look. It's really important to give people more than a flavour. Show them what it's going to be like as best you can. Our own staff appreciate the new space and the public coming in. It's a far more welcoming environment. People can come in, filter through the turnstile gates, come into the maritime garden. It's a quiet, reflective space. Even at lunchtime I stroll through it myself. Huge positive response to the curtain steel, the heritage crane 292, the stainless steel sphere. There's people taking selfie photographs in front of it and tweeting them. It's just a far nicer place to be. Huge sense of achievement with it and pride in the project.